Another example. Happy mood happens to be correlated with being sociable, associating with other people. Well, why is that? Does being with others make us feel better, lift our spirits, and that's why sociable people want to be happier? Is it possible that happy people just like to seek out company? Is it possible that that being on our own, working on our own, is unpleasant, and that you're trying to escape the unpleasantness by being with others? Is it possible that there are certain neurotransmitters in our brain that cause us to be happy and also cause us to become sociable? And again, many other possibilities. Any combination may be super perfect, does not say why the behavior occurs. Okay, finally, the research method we're going to talk about now is the experiment. And the experiment has some great advantages over all of the other research methods we discussed earlier. Only an experiment can allow us to make a determination of cause and effect. We examine how one variable causes changes to another. So let's take a look at this. In an experiment, the researcher would manipulate a variable that is of interest to us, while other extraneous variables are kept under control. Control is very important. And again, that's why experiments are often done in a laboratory, because this way you can exercise the maximum control over extraneous variables and really clarify the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. So the independent variable is a variable that is manipulated by the experimenter. That is the variable that the experimenter wants to create a change in, and to see if that change causes an effect in something else. So if you think about a drug, right? An experimenter might deliver 3 different dosages: high dosage, medium dosage, low dosage of a drug, and seeing the effect, well, on say, subject headaches. Well, those 3 different dosages, this is manipulated by the experimenter. The experimenter is choosing the dosages. One group gets 1 dose, one group gets another, one group gets a third. And then the experimenter is trying to see if the differences in dosage have a different effect on the headache. In that case, the change in pain in the head would be the dependent variable, while the different dosages of the drug would be the independent variable. And extraneous variables are other variables that might also cause change. So if you're testing about a headache, maybe you want to shut off the loud music. Maybe you want to put the person in a quiet environment, like in a laboratory, to see how it works. And in this case, you want to eliminate or minimize those extraneous variables that could be affecting the subject's headache. So that's the sensible. Take a little practice here. What's the independent variable? What's the dependent variable in this experiment? Dr. Smith examines daily exposure to a sun lamp, 1 hour of exposure or no exposure, and sees if there's an impact on people's depression levels in the wintertime. Okay, so 1 hour of exposure versus no exposure impacting depression levels. What is the independent variable? What is being manipulated by Dr. Smith? Well, in this case, Dr. Smith is manipulating sunlight exposure. 1 hour of exposure versus no exposure. Dr. Smith is in control of that. Dr. Smith is choosing who gets the sunlight and who doesn't. So Dr. Smith is manipulating the independent variable. What about the dependent variable? The dependent variable is what is expected to change as a result of the sunlight exposure. Well, the sunlight exposure is supposed to have an impact on the depression level. So depression levels is the dependent variable. Now think about what are some possible extraneous variables that might affect the results. Well, where is the sunlight exposure occurring? Is it occurring in a tanning salon? Is it occurring in a laboratory? Is it occurring in someone's bedroom? All of these different questions. Maybe for different people, what if you have 10 subjects and 3 of them are doing it home in their bedroom, 3 of them are doing it in a laboratory, and 4 of them are doing it in a tanning salon? Well, they may all be exposed to the sun lamp, but they're getting it in all these different settings. So what's the solution? You probably want to keep it simple. Say, have them either do it in a laboratory or perhaps ask them to do it at home in a quiet room, or keeping it as similar as possible for each subject. So that's an example of extraneous variables that could get in the way. When you do an experiment, you would typically have an experimental group and a control group. The group that's exposed to the treatment is called the experimental group. The group that does not get the treatment or perhaps gets a placebo is called the control group. And your idea is you compare the experimental group with the control group. If you expect that there is a difference between the experimental group and the control group, then you would say that your manipulation was an effect. So, for example, in this case here, remember here you're starting off by randomly assignment. Random assignment is an important part. So you have your sample, and hopefully your sample is representative of the population you're interested in. And you randomly assign them to 2 groups. In other words, you don't say, I'm going to choose the dumb-looking people and put them in the control group, and the smart-looking people and put them in the experimental group. No. You want to randomly assign. You want everybody in your sample to have an equal chance of being in the control group and the experimental group. Once you do that, the control group is not exposed. So in this case here, in this particular example on this slide, the group that is in the experimental group watches reality TV. The group that is in the control group does not. The watching reality TV, you measure a change in charitable behavior. Does watching reality TV cause you to engage in more charitable behavior or less charitable behavior? If you see that there is a difference in charitable behavior between the control group and the experimental group, and you've controlled for all those extraneous variables and you've randomly assigned people to conditions, then you could probably make a conclusion that it is the reality TV that seems to be having some kind of an effect on charitable behavior. Random assignment is a crucial part of an experiment. Why is it so important? The reason it is so important is because you want to ensure that your experimental group and your control group are pretty much the same before you begin. If you do random assignment, then you're going to get smart and dumb people in both groups, tall and short people in both groups, happy and sad people in both groups. You're going to have a mixture of different people that, because again, everybody has an equal chance of getting in. And then again, as you said, the larger the sample, the more likely your sample will be more reflective of the true population. So the larger your sample that you can randomly assign conditions to, then the more likely the groups, the experimental group and the control group, the more likely they are to be more or less equivalent. Validity is an important concept when it comes to doing an experiment, particularly an experiment done in a laboratory. There could be a problem of what is called external validity. Is the results in my laboratory representative of real-world issues? So let's say I'm giving a headache medicine in a laboratory. Well, maybe in a laboratory it works, but maybe when mom is home with her screaming kids, that medicine doesn't do jack. If that's the case, because we're looking at a case where that particular study perhaps lacks external validity. So a way to deal with that is perhaps to run another study in a real-world environment to see if the headache medicine works there too. Internal validity is also important when it comes to an experiment. You want to make sure that you're doing everything right. Randomly assigning the conditions, making sure that the manipulation of your independent variable is clear, and and then making sure that you're not responding in any kind of biased way to is it possible that you might be having an unintentional effect on your subject? All these different things. Are you making good logical conclusions from your results? All these indicate internal validity. And again, validity essentially means truth. Validity, how true are your results, will essentially tell us the validity. Unfortunately, bias is a big threat to validity. When your study has a serious bias, a slant towards one way than the other, then you're not going to be able to trust those results. You're not going to be able to conclude that those results are true. If your results are biased, if your research is biased, you cannot trust your results. Two important types of bias that occur in experimental research is experimenter bias and research participant bias, also called subject bias. And the placebo effect could be a result of research participant bias. If a research participant believes that they are taking some treatment that will make them feel better, well, their own bodies will probably release those endorphins and they will start to feel better, even though they didn't really take anything that would help them. And that's an example of the placebo effect, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Double-blind experiments are the classic way of controlling for both experimenter bias and participant bias. So let's talk about the double-blind procedure. Let's say a researcher wants to know if taking the pill Blimpo helps reduce unwanted belly fat. He randomly finds 50 people to take Blimpo and 50 people to take the sugar pill. In a double-blind study, the researcher does not know who is in which group. So in other words, the researcher doesn't know which person took the placebo, which took the sugar pill, and which took the Blimpo. Likewise, the participants don't know. Participants took a pill, they don't know whether it's a sugar pill or whether it's the diet drug. And that is why it's called a double-blind study, because neither the participants nor the researchers know who is in what group. Why would having this double-blind procedure help control bias? Why would this be important? Why would it be important for the subject, for the researcher, not to know who took the placebo and who took the drug? If the researcher knew who took the drug, they might treat them differently. They might treat the person who took the drug with more encouragement. Hey, you're looking great. Boy, you're looking good. It might actually encourage that person to exercise more. So in this case, the researcher is affecting the behavior of the subject because the researcher is behaving a little bit more encouraging to the people who got the Blimpo than the people who got the sugar pill. Likewise, let's say you are a subject and you know you're taking a sugar pill. Well, if you're taking a sugar pill, you say, well, I'm not going to lose weight. I'll just keep on eating. Ha ha ha. Or if you are taking Blimpo, you might start believing that, hey, this is a miracle drug. And you might actually start eating less. You might actually start exercising more. And you might say, well, it's because of the drug. But it's really your behavior that's changed. If you don't know which group you're in, your behavior will be the same in both groups. If you don't know which subject is taking the drug and which is taking the sugar pill, you're going to treat them both the same. And that's why it's important to have a double-blind procedure, to reduce those biases. Other biases can be important to consider when it comes to psychology. Gender bias. In the old studies in history, there was a big gender bias in that research historically focused on males, and the research was done on males, not females. So a lot of the classic studies in the past were done on men. Meanwhile, women are important too. So that has changed over the years, and now both men and women are studied. There's also a bias in terms of most of the research in psychology is done in Western countries, United States, Europe. But there's a growing body of research growing in Asian countries and other countries around the world. So maybe that'll change as well. We'd like to essentially see whether the conclusions we make about Americans apply to people other than in America. So a lot of research trying to reduce those kinds of bias, trying to emphasize diversity.